Hey, Dr. Doug here. Welcome to the channel. As a Christian apologist, one of the things that I always really appreciated was that the resurrection of Jesus Christ was not only the primary message of the gospel in the early church, but it also provided some of the best evidence that Christianity was true. Now, over the years, many Christian apologists have developed very deep, complex ways of defending the resurrection of Jesus Christ, but my personal favorite is one that can be boiled down to a few simple, minimal facts by Dr. Gary Habermas and also popularized by his protege, Dr. Michael Licona. Now, what these two apologists have pointed out is that with just a few minimally historically attested facts, you can pretty well establish that Jesus Christ rose from the dead, or at least the resurrection is the best explanation for those minimal facts. These can be remembered by the acrostic FEAT, F-E-A-T. Just remember, it's this amazing feat that Jesus accomplished with his resurrection. F stands for fatality. You can't have a resurrection if Jesus didn't actually die. E is for the empty tomb. A is for the appearances of Jesus after his death. And T is for the transformation of those he appeared to. Now, with these four minimal, historically attested facts, counter-arguments against the resurrection can typically be answered. Now, all legitimate Christians believe that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. However, not all Christians believe in what the Catholic Church teaches about the appearances of the Virgin Mary after her death. Now, I'm not talking about ridiculous tales of seeing Mary's face in a piece of toast or something like that. I am talking about authentic, historically verified apparitions or appearances of Our Lady, typically named after their location. So you have Our Lady of Guadalupe, Our Lady of Lourdes, etc. Typically, Protestants reject these appearances and apparitions, but I thought it would be interesting to apply the same kind of apologetic method that Christians use to establish the resurrection of Christ and see how they stack up against these appearances of Mary. Because if they will do the same job for Marian appearances that they do for Jesus' resurrection, then it would be inconsistent to reject one and not reject the other. So first, let's look at fatality. Jesus died and Mary died. This is pretty well incontestable. Nobody that really matters is going to challenge that, although there are some Christians that believe Mary was assumed into heaven before her death. It has not been definitively taught by any group. So as far as the F in feet goes, we have equal evidence for both Jesus' resurrection and the Marian appearances. Now, what about the empty tomb? Now, this is the least historically attested. According to the majority of scholars, the empty tomb can be established historically, but it is probably the weakest of the big four. Now, when it comes to Mary, we have not one, but two empty tombs. Now, this doesn't establish her appearances, and it doesn't really establish anything with regard to what Jesus' empty tomb does, because we're not saying that Mary resurrected. However, it is interesting to note that Mary's tombs seem to be more of a memorial because they are found in both of the places that she spent quite a bit of time after Jesus rose from the dead, in Jerusalem and in Ephesus. What's important to note here is that neither tomb holds a body, and there are no relics of either Jesus or Mary. Now, if you know the history and practices of the church, you know that when a saint dies, their relics are typically collected and stored by churches, sometimes around the world. And so the fact that there are no relics of either Jesus or Mary supports the teaching of the church that they were brought up to heaven and did not see corruption on earth physically. Now, the part of the evidence that I think is most telling is the appearances and the transformation. I'm just going to consider those at the same time because it's one thing to report a story and collect those stories, but it's quite another to show a transformation in one's life or ministry, some kind of thing that is difficult to explain without miracles. And we certainly see that in the life of the apostles and those others that saw the resurrection, because they went from being scared, scattered people to a very strong, unified front. And it is not their belief in the resurrection, but their being an eyewitness of the resurrection that transformed their lives. It is very difficult to get around that fact, because if somebody was just lying, they wouldn't have the kind of transformed life that we see with the apostles. Now, as far as the numbers go, if we read 1 Corinthians 15, 1 through 5, we see that Paul names 13 people that saw the resurrected Christ. These are the 12 apostles and Paul himself. Now, Paul also refers to over 500 of the brethren that saw Jesus, but these are not named, so we do not know for sure who they are. Now, of course, this is all an anecdotal report. However, it is found in one of Paul's better attested letters, and so even skeptics will typically accept 1 Corinthians as being a genuine letter of Paul. So let's just dispense with any kind of skepticism here and say that Jesus' resurrection was seen by 13 named individuals and over 500 unnamed. How does that compare to the Marian appearances? Let's fast forward to just some of the modern apparitions that we have been able to investigate using more modern methods. There are 4 criteria that the Church uses to authoritatively approve an apparition, Marian or otherwise. First, there must be moral certainty, or at least great probability, that something miraculous has occurred. That is, it's not something that can be easily explained by natural causes or by being a deliberate fake. Second, the person or persons who claim to have seen an appearance must be mentally sound, honest, sincere, of upright conduct, and obedient to the Church. So we're not just talking about any kook that calls up the church and says, "Hey, I saw Mary." Third, the content of any messages coming from these apparitions must be theologically acceptable, morally sound, and free from error. It's important to note that just because an apparition is approved, that does not mean that the Church is saying that every message from that apparition is true. There's a difference between saying something is free from error, that we can know that, and saying that we know it's true. So for example, if I prophesy that in the future, World War III will be fought in Africa, that isn't necessarily true, but it doesn't conflict with anything we actually know. So we could say that I'm free from error when I say that, even if I'm not actually right. And it is for this reason that the content of any apparition is never declared dogma. Apparitions do not settle dogma. They don't create new doctrines or anything like that. Finally, number 4, the apparition must yield positive and continuing spiritual goods, such as an increase in prayer, charity, or conversion. Now, in the last 5 centuries, there have been about 25 church-approved Marian apparitions, and these have approval by the level of the bishop. They don't have to go up to the level of the pope. However, the Vatican itself has approved 16 of these. And of all of those, we're only going to look at 3. The 3 Marian apparitions that have undergone the most historical and scientific scrutiny are the apparitions at Guadalupe, Lourdes, and Fatima. First, let's look at what happened with Our Lady of Guadalupe. In 1531, an Aztec native named Juan Diego had a vision of the Virgin Mary. This vision was accompanied by a gathering of roses, which he put inside his tilma or cloak. And when he went to the bishop, he opened up the tilma, and the roses fell to the ground, and a picture of Our Lady of Guadalupe appeared inside the cloak. Now, Juan Diego's tilma and the image it has have been the object of much scientific investigation, and there are all kinds of quasi-miraculous qualities of this thing already. But let's just skip all that and talk simply about the effects. What was the transformation of this appearance? Well, in the next decade, nearly 10 million natives converted to Christianity. This is the largest conversion in human history. So that is a pretty big deal. Let's jump over to Our Lady of Lourdes. In 1858, a child named Bernadette Soubirous saw a lady, small in stature, dressed in white with a blue sash around her waist and a gold rosary. These apparitions appeared a number of times to Bernadette, and ever since then, the cave where these appearances took place has been considered a place of miracles. Lourdes pilgrims have reported over 7,000 miraculous cures, not including miracles that took place outside of Lourdes after a visit. Now, only 70 of these have been investigated and completely approved by the Church. So one thing I do want to note is just how conservative the Church actually is with authenticating these miracles. The church is not just trying to blow up its claims to sound legitimate. Okay, moving on to Our Lady of Fatima. In 1917, 3 children, Lucia Santos and her cousins Jacinta and Francisco Marto, had several visions of the Virgin Mary, and in these appearances, Mary told the children to devote themselves to the Holy Trinity and to a daily recitation of the Rosary, praying for the end of the First World War. Mary also revealed predictions such as the coming of World War II, the errors of the country of Russia spreading around the world, and some would say the assassination attempt on Pope John Paul II in 1981. Now that's already fairly impressive, but wait until you hear what happened next. The children were promised that a miracle would occur on October 13th, 1917. Now, by this time, the appearances were well known, and so a crowd of about 50,000 people showed up to see if this miracle would take place. At the same time, these people observed the sun seeming to rotate on its axis and throw out various colors. It even appeared to be approaching the earth, causing many to believe that the world was coming to an end. The sun then returned to its normal state. Now, in case you missed it, that miracle was witnessed by 50,000 people. In fact, there were other witnesses about 40 kilometers away that reported seeing it as well. Now, again, these are just the top 3. If we take all 25 approved Marian apparitions, we would have at least 67 named witnesses. But we also have tens of thousands of witnesses of miracles that accompanied those appearances. And again, the great majority of them occurred in modern times, when the full apparatus of the church and scientific investigation could be used to look into them. I'm not saying that there is absolutely no way to argue against these miracles and these appearances. I'm not saying that they form such convincing truths that you would be a fool to not believe in them. However, if you are a Christian who believes in Jesus' resurrection on the witness of 13 named individuals plus over 500 unnamed, and you reject the Marian apparitions that have a total of at least 67 named witnesses and many tens of thousands of witnesses of the accompanying miracles, you've got a bit of a problem. I've been a Christian apologist for about 30 years, and I have seen some of the best argue for the resurrection using the kinds of facts that also support the Marian apparitions. And in fact, I would argue that if Jesus' resurrection had the kind of evidence that any one of the really big apparitions had, we would be trumpeting that from the rooftops and using that in every apologetic debate. As it stands, we are just fine using the much more conservative numbers and reports of Jesus' resurrection. So the question I want to ask you is, are you believing in Jesus' resurrection because of the evidence, or is it because you already think it's true and the evidence is just kind of icing on the cake? Because if you're going to accept the evidence for the resurrection and not the evidence for the Marian appearances, you've got some difficult explaining to do. All right, I hope that has given you some food for thought. Let me know in the comments what you think about this. Is there something I'm missing? Is this a false analogy of some kind? I'd be interested in hearing from you. I try to respond to videos for at least the first couple days, but eventually I run out of time and have to get to other things. But I do appreciate the interaction. Even just watching you guys go at it is a lot of fun sometimes. If you like the video, would you mind giving it a like and subscribe to Douglas Beaumont if you are into Christian apologetics, philosophy, and theology. Until next time, God bless.